Welcome to 3 Books with Neil Pasricha, where each chapter we uncover and discuss the 3 most formative books of an inspiring individual. We believe books change lives, and that's why we are the only podcast in the world by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians. Thanks so much for joining us. Is it just me, or is it getting harder and harder to grow up these days? I admit I am a little bit more grown up. I'm not super grown up, but I'm 38 years old at the time of talking to you right now. But I have small children, and I have a 4-year-old son, and I have a 2-year-old son. And I see the world that they're growing up in, and I see how much different it is than mine. I mean, it used to be when you were a kid, you could be the best basketball player in your whole school. Speaking hypothetically, of course, but you could be, right? These days, of course, you can compare yourself to somebody on YouTube who can sink 3-pointers over their head from half court, and you'll never be as good as that. And you could be the best Super Mario 3 player in your basement, or the best ping pong player in your basement. These days, you go to YouTube and somebody can defeat the whole game in like 3 minutes. Whereas you, or me, get stuck at the Hammer Brothers. And that's just a little tiny glimpse of the challenges of the world today. Parental pressures, society expectations, loneliness, depression, anxiety, the stress of trying to get into a good school and get a good job and stick out and be different and be remarkably unique to a college or a university or a group of friends or an employer. It's hard. It's really hard, and it feels really overwhelming. And even for somebody who's just watching from the outside, like me, I'm like, this is intense. And I think that's why I gravitate so strongly to the work of Sarah Andersen. That is Sarah Andersen, Andersen, Andersen with an E-N at the end. And I really want you to Google her and check her out, because her work is really putting a finger on all these anxieties and pressures that young people are feeling today. She is the author of 3 books. They are called Herding Cats. That's the most recent one that came out this year, which I bumped into in the bookstore when I first sort of discovered her work. Then there was Adulthood is a Myth, her first one, and Big Happy Mushy Lump. What do these books talk about? Well, they're graphic novels, they're cartoon strips. They've been winning all kinds of awards from Goodreads and places like that. And they really just sort of articulate the stresses people have with screens, with anxiety, with relationships in the digital age, with wanting to stay in when all your friends want you to go out. All that vast array of emotions, she articulates them so beautifully. And she does so in a way that's really unapologetic. Like, she doesn't try too hard with making the drawings precious and perfect. And you'll hear why she was inspired to do that, even though she went to like a formal art training and art school, why she sort of swerves the other way with her drawings, making them more realistic and accessible. This conversation's about something bigger, though, I think, too, which is how do we reach and tap back into the purest versions of ourselves that felt love and were loved as children? Sarah's first book was an eye-opener for me, and I wasn't, totally resonating with it myself, but when I read it and I asked her why she picked it, she was like, you know what, Neil, I picked that first book because it reminds me of the version of myself that I liked the most. The version where I wore giant wolf sweatshirts and didn't care about how my hair looked. And maybe that's all we're trying to do. Maybe all we're trying to do in life is tap back into that feeling of pure love, of being loved, of pure acceptance, being accepted, and finding the confidence inside ourselves to pursue the path that we know we already want to take. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed riding up to the top of the tallest structure in the western hemisphere of the planet, the CN Tower. We went up to the Sky Pod. We're sitting up there with skyscrapers and planes below us. And we sat down crouched, as you can see on, just go to 3books.co and you'll see the picture of us kind of crouched at the top of the CN Tower. And Sarah really opened up about finding that perfect version of yourself deep down and articulating the stresses and emotions that we have today in order to shirk and get rid of them all so that we can live our very best lives. I'm so grateful and honored to share with you my conversation with Sarah Andersen of Sarah Scribbles. Please enjoy. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I feel funny, like wedged here, sitting cross-legged beside you, on top of the CN Tower.
Yeah, we are very, very, very high up.
And you know, I was telling you have never been up here.
No.
But I knew you were in Toronto, and I wanted to give you a unique Toronto experience. So I thought, hey, what better thing to do than come up to the world's tallest tower? Look, you can see there's a plane flying below us.
Oh my God.
Right now.
Oh my God. Yeah. People can't see, but I'm sort of like clinging to the wall a little bit.
and for those that know Toronto, we're in the Sky Pod right now, which is the part of Toronto even higher than where Drake was sitting on the cover of Views. How do you feel being up here?
I feel kind of connected to Drake right now, and that's a good feeling.
I'm glad to hear it. But when we walked out here, both of us were kind of like, whoa. It's because there's the glass floor.
Yeah.
So for those of you who want to do that, you can stand on this glass floor and you can look down, I don't know, something like 1,800 feet or whatever it is, to the Sky Dome where the Blue Jays play. So thank you so much for setting a new high bar for the podcast and coming up here. I'm going to tack on a really long, beautifully articulated introduction to the front of this. Mm-hmm. So I won't talk a lot about your amazing accomplishments now, but suffice to say, I absolutely love your work. I think Sarah Scribbles is genius. I think you articulate so many emotions so many people have about social awkwardness and anxiety and millennialism and growing up. And you do that in such a simple way with that fifth panel punchline just hit you in the stomach every time. And actually, maybe this is a good place to start. Actually, last night when I was flipping through some of your books, you know, I have Herding Cats in front of me, which, by the way, has the best ever, like, velvety purple sweater on the cover. I don't know if you had to convince your publisher to do that or not. But I also love this comic in Big Mushy Happy Lump. Your second Sarah Scribbles collection. It's on page 14, and it's called How I Spend My Money. First panel is groceries, and you, or the Sarah character, saying just the basics. Second panel is clothes, and you're thinking, an occasional splurge, but mostly necessities. Third panel says household items. You're holding some paper towel. You're like, whichever brands are cheapest. And the fourth panel says books. And there you are, dolled up with your sunglasses, your big $ necklace, and what is that? Like a boa? I don't know. Like a feather vest?
It's kind of like a faux fur, like, pimp jacket, maybe?
A faux fur pimp jacket. I like that. Thank you for articulating that perfectly for us. And then the fifth and final panel, the sucker punch panel, as I was saying, you are just throwing your arms in the air, money and bills are flying everywhere, and there's piles of books on the counter. Can you tell us about this comic strip? Because we're on 3 books right now talking about books, and you have this beautiful cartoon about how you spend all your money on books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's actually like the one that people mention the most, like when they come to book signings and stuff. I think that's like probably my most famous comic, and I didn't think it would be, because I feel like bookworms tend to sort of like isolate themselves a bit and think the world is not like them. But it's very accurate to how I actually spent my money. And I think it's a really important comic to me because it seems that a lot of people feel that way, which is a great place for the world to be in.
Totally. We get kind of chastised or criticized a little bit on 3 books sometimes. We'll have a guest, and these are friends of ours. They say, you know, why books? Why focus on this dying industry? It's never going to come back, you know. And I always say, no, you're totally wrong. We're actually experiencing the largest ever global literacy rates. We have the most ever people who can read. The percentage of analog versus digital is rising in books, unlike film and TV and music. So this is the start of a new analog book revolution, and I'm so happy to have you in our movement. Maybe you could be one of our leaders.
Oh, I would love to be.
And maybe we could have your permission to put that comic on 3books.co.
Oh, for sure.
Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now everyone's heard that I got permission before all the copyright trolls come after me. So we have your 3 most formative books here. And which one would you like to start with? I think I usually like to read the front and back for the listener so they get a little mental context.
Yeah.
And then I'd like to ask you about your relationship with the book. So which one did you want to start with?
Okay, so I'm going to start at the way beginning, which is, I believe her name is pronounced Tamora or Tamara. Tamora Pierce is
Tamora
how I
Pierce.
always pronounced it. And it's from her Immortals series, and it's called Wild Magic.
Okay, so this book is by Tamora Pierce. It's called Wild Magic. The front cover is a picture of
A badger.
a badger. Okay, thank you for clarifying which kind of furry critter that was. And at the back it says, 13-year-old Dane has always had a special connection with animals, but only when she's forced to leave home does she realize it's more than a knack, it's magic. With this wild magic, not only can Dane speak to animals, but she can also make them obey her. Dane takes a job handling horses for the Queen's Riders, where she meets the master mage Numair and becomes his student. Wild Magic was written in 1992, and it was published by Antheum Books, which is a division of Simon and Schuster. Obviously, it's the first book, as we mentioned, in the Immortals Quartet. Wild Magic, Wolfspeaker, Emerald Mage, and the Realms of Gods, which is her second big series because she had another series, some people may know this series, called The Song of the Lioness Quartet. These are books that were written in the 70s and 80s. So tell us about your relationship with Wild Magic.
Sure. So I think that I feel like every reader has one fantasy book in their childhood that just sort of like really engulfs that part of their world, because I think children have like such vivid internal worlds and like really imaginative places they go to. And for me, that was this book. And, it just like consumed me. And so the main character is female, which was also really formative for me. And she has the ability to speak to animals. And I was totally one of those kids that like, if I could have a power, that's what it would be. And the second of these is actually called Wolfspeaker. So when I was like 11, I was like one of those wolf girls. Like I wore shirts with like Native American wolves on them, and I had like super long hippie hair. That's like my favorite version of myself.
Wow. So can I ask two whys? Why was your favorite, the skill you most desired, talking to animals, as opposed to mine, which is being invisible? And why was that your favorite version of yourself as you keep telling us the story?
Okay, well, I think it's funny because my character in Sarah talks to animals in the comic strip, right?
Perfect,
So it's
yeah.
sort of like carried over. I think it sort of shows in the comic. Like I always really loved animals, and when I was younger, I wanted to be a biologist. So that's always been like an important part of me, and it sort of remains in adulthood. And I think it was sort of formed in these years. And your second question, why was that my favorite version?
Yeah, why was the long-haired wolf sweatshirt wearing version of you, as opposed to the version now wearing like the camo jacket, black shoes, black pants? Why the long-hair wolf version?
Because I was so like unabashedly enthusiastic about things, and I had no shame about being a nerd. Like I really was into this like fantasy wolf speaking world. And obviously I like to draw and was kind of like a weird artsy kid. And I was just so like simple about it. I didn't have any of those like self-conscious fears yet. And I did whatever I wanted to do without like worrying about what people thought of me. And so, if I could go back and like meet myself at a specific time, I would love to go back and just like talk to 11-year-old me who was like this enthusiastic wolf girl and like drawing anime in my sketchbooks.
And we're both smiling and laughing, but there's something so beautiful about this idea that you had no shame and no worry. I mean, one of the values we have on 3 Books is no book guilt, no book shame.
Yeah.
So we say that whatever you, and I'm so glad you gave us a book that's from your childhood with a badger on the cover called Wild Magic. Because there's nothing about the show that wants to judge readers. We think judgment gets in the way of reading.
Yeah.
And so how do we tease out more of those shameless sides of ourselves?
That's a difficult question because I have a lot of book shame actually, and I read like an information processor. Like I read almost all nonfiction, and so I'm kind of bad at answering that question because I'm sort of like self-conscious with my media choices. I think maybe it comes back to like how I write Sarah Scribbles. It's just following like the part of your intuition that you feel is really honest and not being afraid to show it, because I feel like part of being like cool or self-conscious is a deception. And I think everyone has the potential to be deceiving in that way. So I think those like nerdier parts of ourselves, like I think we always understand them when we see them in other people. We just for some reason have a fear of showing it in ourselves. And I think that's kind of bull, isn't it?
Well, no, because I look at Sarah's Scribbles, and I grew up reading like Garfield and Farside and Calvin and Hobbes and so on, and I've heard you talk about those strips. But I see you changed the length of your strip a lot. You have different numbers of boxes. What's the word? Panels.
Yeah.
You have different. Even the fonts are different. You have like so you like seem to be into letting yourself have different versions of yourself. But talk to me about the book shame, if you don't mind, because we talk about that a lot in the show. So to whatever extent you're comfortable, I don't want to push you, obviously, but why do you have? What's the book shame about?
I'm not sure. I think it's because I come from a very literary family. And so I remember when I was still reading a ton of fiction, and I do still read fiction, but nonfiction is sort of my love, and we can talk about that later. Like in high school, I was very hell-bent on reading the classics so I could keep up with my dad. Like I was reading, like Jane Eyre, which I loved actually, but I was always reading books that were like hard for me to get through, sort of because I wanted to have that like intellectual prowess. And I really think that's where it comes from. But I don't know. I think there's something really to be said about letting that go, even though I don't think I've accomplished that yet.
No, and we're all working on that.
Yeah.
And one thing I always say is, like I'm always proud when someone says I have your book on the back of my toilet. Like, I always feel like that's a compliment.
Yeah.
Because they're admitting to me, that they read on the toilet, which, by the way, when I was a kid, no one even used to admit that. That was like itself a thing. And then they're saying it's together with what I'm picturing is like dog-eared Ziggy's, a New Yorker from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's okay as long as you're reading. And my wife Leslie always says, like, when she was a kid and she used to read Babysitter's Club, some people would say to her mom, like, "Oh, they're reading Babysitter's Club, like, how gauche or whatever."
Right.
And Leslie's mom, my wife's mom, would always be like, "They're reading."
Yeah.
Period.
Yep.
That's the
true.
goal. Just reading.
Yeah. And you mentioned Babysitter's Club. I love the Babysitter's Club. That's another one of those series, and I think I like that you said, but they're reading, and I think people started maybe changing their ideas about that a little bit when like Harry Potter appeared, right?
Yeah.
Because Harry Potter does have that like literary importance, but it was still a book about like wizards and witches, and I think parents were really like maybe started to adopt that mentality that like just let the kids enjoy the books, and I think enjoyment is like such a key part of reading.
Totally. And now, 5 years ago, I think it's something like we spent 18 minutes on our cell phones a day. And today it's something like 4 to 5 hours. So as everybody keeps searing their retinas, developing black bags under their eyes with infinite amounts of screen, just reading books even gains even more importance.
Yeah.
Just having a break to like let your eyes have a rest.
Yeah. I think the break part is really important. I think it's such like, I feel like the internet used to be an escape from reality, and now going away from the internet and into a book is like an even more important escape from reality. It's sort of like a double thing.
I think you have a strip about that, right? Like it used to be the internet. I think I saw one strip of yours. It's like going to the internet was like a break, and now it's like I'm butchering one of your strips, but like then now it's pulling away, or maybe it's about Facebook.
No. Yeah, in Herding Cats. Yeah. I did actually write specifically about that in Herding Cats.
A friend of mine named David Kane runs a blog called raptitude.com, Getting Better at Being Human. And he has a recent essay there, which I recommend people read, and I'll put it in the show notes. It's called, "It's Time to Put the Internet Back in a Box in Our Basement." And he talks about how when he grew up with the internet, it was like going down to the unfinished basement, the 2400 baud modem, right? And then you go log onto a BBS. It's like a little thing.
Yeah.
But now that it's everywhere in every device and everything in our pockets and our watches and our heads and our screens and the elevators, he's like, it's time to put it back in the basement. And this is a super viral article because we need a break from that.
I think that's true, but the question is how, because it's so intertwined in our lives. You know, I always want to leave my phone at home, so that I'm not just kind of like mindlessly browsing the internet, but I need people to contact me so they know I'm not dead. And like, so I don't really know how to do that, but I agree we need to kind of pull ourselves away, but it's literally part of everyday real life now. So
Totally. You noticed when we just took a picture of ourselves together that my phone's in black and white. I just went into settings, general accessibility, and in the visibility options, there's an option to turn your entire iPhone, if you have an iPhone, into black and white. The slot machine in a casino like properties of my cell phone totally dissipated for me.
Really?
Like, I am no longer attracted to the flying colors zooming into the main screen. I just like, it's still totally functional.
Yeah.
But I'm not attracted to my phone anymore.
Did you figure out that technique yourself, or did you?
I can't remember if I figured it out myself or if I think there might have been a website like Common Sense Media, or there's people, I do follow a lot of people online that are trying to figure out ways of reducing technology consumption. It's a big passion for me. And I talk a lot about happiness. So that's why cell phones have entered into my stuff. I didn't go looking for cell phone stuff. It's just like cell phones are getting in the way of our happiness. So I now talk about it. I gave a speech yesterday to Ernst & Young, and they had questions about like cell phone addiction, sending emails late at night, looking at things in the morning. And I talked about some of the research about when you look at a bright screen before you go to sleep, your brain doesn't produce as much melatonin.
Yeah.
So you don't have as good a sleep. And when your phone's in black and white, when your charger's in your basement, when your phone's in airplane mode, like little things like that, we can start to put our devices back in a little fence.
Yeah. I think we need fences. Yeah. That's something I think about a lot too. Sorry if I'm not being articulate. I'm just kind of like running through everything you said. Because it is so, I can like feel how unhealthy it is for me when I'm just like scrolling, and how present I become when I just put it down. And I feel like there's a way of doing it. And I really liked your descriptions. But I sort of do roll my eyes at people that think that we just need to like burn the whole thing down, because it's literally intertwined with who we are now. And it enables, like for you and me, it enables our careers, and it's part of our work.
I wouldn't have met you without the internet.
Right, exactly. So I like the phrase building fences. I think that's a great way of putting it.
Cool. Thank you. I love the fact that we took the chat about wild magic.
I know. How did we get here?
Well, and fantasy worlds, and you talked about how you know this is about formative books. You have this, your character Sarah is talking to animals. It gave you a mental escape. We talked about book shame, book guilt, and then we talked about, hey, we need those types of books.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I maybe pulled the thread line together or not. So your second book, is it this one before I introduce it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so excited you picked this book. Your second book is Hyperbole and a Half: Unfortunate Situations, Flawed Coping Mechanisms, Mayhem, and Other Things That Happened. A graphic novel by Allie Brosh, Brosh. This is a collection of Allie's blog posts from hyperboleandahalf.blogspot.com, together with some more beautifully anxiety-ridden autobiographical stories that have an incredible connective tissue with people that can relate to not returning a video in time to a video store and not being able to get off the couch to do it. And these stories are beautiful. I actually heard about this book from Bill Gates, of all people, who wrote about it on Gates Notes. By the way, you guys will hear lots of tourists walking by in the background, but we think that adds color to the show. This book was published in 2013. It's on a lonely island, I think, because it's her only book. By Touchstone, a division of Simon & Schuster. It is heavy. It is colorful. It is dense. It is emotionally rich and dynamic, and sometimes disturbing, especially her incredible essays about depression. Tell us about your relationship with Hyperbole and a Half by Allie Brosh.
Well, I'm so glad we have it in front of us, because it is really such like a perfect book to look through. Like, it's so visually wonderful. But this is an extremely important book to me for so many different reasons. I think there would not be a Sarah Scribbles without Hyperbole and a Half. I think the first...
Why? You're going to tell us why.
Yes. So the first thing is that she sort of embraced her amateurness, and she literally made some stuff on MS Paint and put it on her blog. And I was at art school at the time, and in the illustration and cartooning worlds, there's definitely sort of like a thing to be said about like professionalism and being professionally trained and knowing how to use ink and all of that. And so before this, people calling themselves cartoonists were sort of these like New Yorker guys, and they were like serious artists. And she sort of just like went for it, and it was amazing. It's this like, I love that like you can be a cartoonist or an artist and not have to like comply with these rigid institutions. And you know, she has influenced me in that way because I did the same thing. So I was bored at work and I was like, I'm just going to post some badly drawn comics to Tumblr. So our origin stories are very similar, and her story really enabled mine because even though I was training professionally for illustration.
You were in art school in Maryland, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you discovered hyperbole.blogspot.com?
Yes.
How old were you at the time?
I was 19.
So you weren't creating anything like Sarah Scribbles. You were just observing someone else doing maybe something similar.
Yeah. And what I went to school for is like, it's like editorial illustration. So like drawings. And I didn't apply any of that drawing skill to Sarah Scribbles because she had sort of like enabled a part of the internet that was like, whatever you think. And you know, she was also inspired by some like earlier internet, like amateurness, like those, like the Rage comics, like the very early kind of meme stuff. So yes.
What's that stuff for those that like me that don't know? Early Rage meme.
So it's like a style of comics that's literally has like a pre-drawn format, and they're all very badly drawn, but it's like pre-drawn faces, and people would just like add text in and sort of make their own comics. And I think like an early one was like a Rage comic, where it was like something that makes you mad, and it all had the same face at the end. And so they would just use this face, and then they would like either go in and draw like very crude stick figures or just add in the text themselves and make the comic about something that had like happened to them or that they thought was relatable. So
what was the face?
It was this like really like hideous thing that somebody I think probably had drawn in paint. And it's just like an angry yelling guy.
So they used that sort of angry yelling guy meme as the punchline for multiple storylines that people had a bad day or were upset at something.
Yes.
Oh, cool. I'd love to link to that in our show notes if we can dig it up.
They exist everywhere. Okay. I mean, they're not like
hard to find.
And they're not like the pinnacle of like artistic achievement, but that's something that's really wonderful about the internet. Is just you don't have to be trained or come from institutions. Is that you can sort of go with your own instincts and skills, and that's what Allie Brosh did, and then later that's what I did. And she along with someone like Matt Inman sort of
the Oatmeal,
made the leap from webcomic to print comic and didn't have to go through the newspaper syndicate system.
Oh, interesting.
And so that was also another way of like enabling what I did, was that I saw that they had been published and were successful, and they were like real life cartoonists from the internet. And so
internet to book.
Yes.
Jumping and leapfrogging the traditional newspaper step.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And she was sort of part of a wave of people that did that. So when I went into webcomics, I sort of also had that pre-existing idea that it was serious. It was a serious profession, and that if I worked at it, maybe one day I would have a book, and now I do.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I also heard you say like the drawings are crude. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at the cover, and it's like this pink, stick figure, I guess her, with the shark fin, as she calls it, or the points of hair. It looks like something anyone could draw. I'm not saying anyone could. It just looks like something. And if the comics are about social awkwardness and like, dealing with feelings of anxiety and shame, how beautiful a metaphor that the drawings themselves don't need to be perfect.
Yes, exactly. And it just makes the whole thing extremely accessible. And my comic as well is extremely simple. And I keep saying the word enabled, but yeah, her way of drawing sort of informed mine. And
do your comics or do you guys have any form of relationship? Like the comic, do people read both of? Do you ever hear that? Like, I
think we get recommended together a lot, but Allie Brosh has been a little bit like off the internet scene for a minute, so I haven't met her or like we're not really sure what she's up to.
Yeah. I've
but
heard,
she's entitled to
I've heard
that.
of course. I've heard rumors of a potential second book. I don't know if it'll ever come out, but
yeah, I've heard rumors as well, and I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm hoping for one.
Not everybody can be as amazing as you with 3 books in 3 years. That's pretty hard to pull off. For those that don't know, we're recording this in 2018, and Sarah has a book come out. Adulthood is a Myth came out in 2016, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then,
I believe so.
And then Big Mushy Happy Lump came out in 2017, and then Herding Cats, your newest book, came out in 2018. By the time this actually airs, I wouldn't be surprised if you have a box set at Costco with 5 books in it, because it just keeps getting. It's amazing your how fast you're coming up with this content. It's incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Should we transition to the third book?
Sure.
Okay. And you are taking us on a wild ride here, Sarah. And I have a few questions that sort of tie the 3 of them together that I'm going to ask you after.
Sure.
But we've gone from Tamora Pierce's Wild Magic with a badger on the cover as part of the Immortal series, all the way swerving to Hyperbole and a Half, the kind of anxiety and social awkwardness based graphic novel by Allie Brosh, all the way to your third book, which is Crash Override by Zoe Quinn. The subtitle is How Gamergate Nearly Destroyed My Life and How We Can Win the Fight Against Online Hate. So this book it says here, you've heard about the dark side of the internet, hackers, anonymous mobs attacking unlucky victims, and revenge porn, but that kind of thing would never happen to you, right? Zoe Quinn used to feel the same way. She's a video game developer whose ex-boyfriend unleashed a rambling blog post strategically built out of half-truths, using it to incite a mob hell-bent on ruining her life. They hacked her account, stole nude photos, harassed her family, friends, and colleagues, stalked and threatened her. The mob organized into a so-called movement / hashtag Gamergate. So this is the story of online hate. And you sort of paired it with me when you told me that you wanted to talk about this with so you've been publicly shamed by John Ronson. So obviously we'll let you talk about both if you'd like to. This book was just published in 2017 by Hachette Book Group. Tell us about your relationship with Crash Override, and then if you want to subtly pull in So You've Been Publicly Shamed, you're of course welcome to talk about both.
Sure. So we just talked about Hyperbole and a Half and all the good things that the internet can do. And so Allie had started writing, I think, in 2010, 2011. And now it's 2018. And we have seen the internet take this shift.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's a shift or if it's just sort of showing its true colors. And Zoe Quinn's Crash Override basically documents an online targeted harassment campaign. And it's an important book because it's not like a boohoo, this happened to me story. It sort of really reveals the ins and outs of why it happened and how it happened, but most importantly, what enabled it. And that's a conversation I'm always wanting to have, is what systems enable online abuse and how do we prevent this and curb this without necessarily evoking censorship, because that's what people are afraid of. But I think what's happening right now is not okay. And as someone with a large internet presence, it can be really difficult for me to keep working in light of, some of these same people actually have targeted me. And so it has made my world quite difficult. And I'm really invested in change. And I think Zoe's book really takes those steps. And an incredibly brave person as well. I've talked to her a few times, and incredibly empathetic. I think going through something like this sort of sparks more empathy in people. You might think she would like close off after this, but she became so determined to help other people that she formed Crash Override, which is an organization that helps people who have been targeted.
People who have been targeted with online abuse can approach this organization called Crash Override, and they get resources, help navigating the legal channels as a I'm assuming a free service to them around the world. You, not to interrupt you, you've taken us into like your feeling of it today. I can see from your eyes and your body language that you're very passionate. Can you take us a step back? How did you get into this? How did this become an interesting subject matter for you? Was it brought upon you by some online abuse, as you hinted at, or nobody sort of picks up Crash Override off a shelf and like, this looks like a great book, I'm going to read it. You had something that pulled you into this book. Tell us the story if you can go back.
Sure. So I think late 2016, like a lot of these same people, and they come from like the same forums, started editing my work to reflect white supremacist views. And this happens to a lot of cartoonists, actually. Matt Fury, who made the frog Pepe that the alt-right has now appropriated as a symbol. He's a quite well-known cartoonist and very well respected in my world. So I was not the first target, but I had to essentially like save my career from this because they were trying to flood the internet with these edits so much so that that people would mistake them for my work and that my reputation would be damaged, or that people could not enjoy my work without also remembering this association. And that just like changed the way I thought about everything. And it also introduced me to like how dark this election cycle really was. And
why your work? Well, why did they target your cartoons?
Well, I think it's sort of a naturally feminist work. It's not about feminism, but it sort of like has a little bit of a natural like left-wing bent. It's very simple, very easy to edit. The main character is female. And then I think me as a person, they were I was somebody I think they wanted to target because
not to publicize their work, but what did they do? They take the strip and they just edit the text in it?
Yeah, and it would be like Holocaust denying things. I'm sorry, it's taking a very dark.
No, you can tell us because we want to. It's an important topic, and unless we talk about it, we're not gonna be able to understand it.
So Zoe was actually one of the people I reached out to because she had gone through this before me. And her story is different. You know, she's not a cartoonist, and there's so many other factors in her narrative. But it was very important for me to sort of take an emotional step back and to like clinically understand what was happening. And so it's not happening to me really anymore, although I do get a certain degree of online abuse. Like I've been, they were calling me and stuff.
Calling on your phone?
Yes.
Oh my God.
So
Who's they? You don't even know. You don't even know the
I'm
people,
not quite sure. I don't know. I sort of have a little bit of a conspiracy theory that maybe some of them are like Russian, but I think that might be a conspiracy theory. I think they're just the alt-right. And I hate to acknowledge them even, but the overarching theme, I think, is how do we make these platforms safer? Because and now I want to talk a little bit about So You've Been Publicly Shamed, is that
by John Ronson, the second book.
Yeah, it's because I think the important thing is that this doesn't happen just to like larger people with larger internet presences, is that this can happen to anybody. And there are a lot of ways that technology enables abuse, not just on these large scale kind of like very bizarre harassment campaigns, but also to the small scale, like abusive exes can use the internet to really damage someone's reputation. And his book kind of makes a point that like people enjoy using this technology to shame others, and it can happen to just ordinary people. So I think both books are really, I think they're really important because they're both sort of the first of their kind. Like they're the first books that talk about and really document this phenomena that I am like really invested in seeing change.
And you said, there's so many systems that make it easy. So, I think there's stories in both books about how difficult it is. John Ronson opens So You've Been Publicly Shamed with a story of a spam bot named John Ronson, kind of pretending to be him. And he starts tweeting at it saying, like, please take it down, please stop. And they're like, no, we're a cybermorph or we're an infomorph. And they won't take it down. And it's like nothing in Twitter is built in for you to like press a button to report and have it reviewed by someone who can click it, take it down. And maybe those technology companies are overwhelmed with sort of, abuse complaints. And so right now there's these beautiful systems that help with communication and they help content go viral and they help the world talk to each other. But you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, we need breaks in those systems and escape hatches, and we need to understand how they work because otherwise the point I actually highlighted in both Crash Override and So You've Been Publicly Shamed is that all these algorithms are built on kind of controversy becoming popular.
Yeah.
So the more everyone lightning bolts on something, therefore the more viral it gets. But that, by definition, includes a lot of stuff that's completely, jarring from either side of the spectrum. So maybe the algorithms are wrong. Like maybe we're sharing the wrong stuff. Maybe the wrong stuff is getting popular.
Right. And that's why I recommend Crash Override specifically, because I'm not someone that knows enough to know exactly what needs to change, but she does.
Because she's like a smart
she's like savvy, a tech person, which I'm not. And I think like my personal opinion, like if I have anything to say about this, is that I think like a website like Twitter, for instance, I think if you have in your terms of service, like no hate speech, and I report an image of somebody, editing my work to show someone being thrown in an oven and you don't take it down, then why did you have the rules in the first place? Like, I think these sites need to abide to their rules. Because I think things like that are not okay. And
the other point the books both make is that the companies are perversely incentivized to grow user base.
Yeah.
So they do not want to delete accounts.
Right. And that sort of goes back to Twitter's like Russian bot problem, is that it's not profitable for them to be going through everything and taking these things down. Like, I don't think they want to be doing that, but I think ethically they really should be,
Yeah. And I also want to just point out in this conversation that the word algorithm, like when I was a kid, no one knew what that word was. Algorithm.
Right.
That was not even a word anyone used. And it's funny, I love all the kids like stomping. And by the way, as you can hear, by the way, to the listeners, there's kids like beautifully stomping as they go by us. Everyone's like taking pictures out the windows. We can see north right now. We can see OCAD. That's that big black and white building on pencil sticks is the Ontario College of Art and Design, right behind the Art Gallery of Ontario, designed by Frank Gehry at the front. So some little art. See that black and white building on stilts? Oh. That's OCAD. Okay. Not the Maryland, but just because you went to art school. And then you can see all these tall buildings out the window. The word algorithm, where was I? The word algorithm. No one knew that word. Now, not only do we know what that word means, we are all trying to game algorithms. This is a podcast. There's been so much about how do you get your podcast on New and Noteworthy? How do you get your podcast to be featured? You got to know this guy at Apple. You got to release 3 episodes within 24 hours right when you launch. I did not do that on 3 books. We have the lunar cycle. We publish on the minute of every full moon and every new moon for 13 straight years. That's 333 chapters for 1,000 formative books. Because you know what one of our values is on this show? Humans are the best algorithm. So we buy Sarah's 3 most formative books, not the Amazon recommendation engine's most recommended books. So I think if I could pull up a tiny bit, it's just like, algorithms are dominating too much of what we do, including what the tech companies are doing, what goes viral, what gets spread. And sometimes when that happens, we have tons of negative consequences.
Yeah. And I think the key thing is that it offers that incentive, but that incentive does not necessarily also mean that it's going to be the best product. It means that there are sort of ways of tricking your way around the system. I think there are certain algorithms that make sense, and I think there are certain like competitive systems that make a lot of sense to sort of like produce the best material. But I think we've really been like ensnared by it.
Good word.
Yeah. And I think creators are sort of stifled by it at times. And I'm really lucky in that I sort of came up in through Tumblr and in like around 2013. So like the Facebook algorithm right now is changing and it's making it harder for creators. But it doesn't matter for me because I already have sort of made it online. But I think for these very small creators, it can be tough, especially when like the rules are constantly shifting.
Well, there's a famous essay that came out recently by the guy who was in charge of Funny or Die. And the essay is titled Facebook Kills Comedy. It's something like that. And we're going to link to it in the notes so we can get the right essay. But it's like the algorithm on Facebook prevents you from kind of leaving. You won't click out of that system. And Funny or Die was based on people going to a funny website that gets paid for creating good quality comedy. And they're like, we can't do that with that algorithm. It does not let us. It doesn't reward us. We make no money off it. They watch our stuff for free on Facebook. We can't get paid.
Yeah, well, that's a problem I have with Facebook. But it doesn't matter to me. Like I said, it doesn't affect me, especially because Facebook is not where I built my audience. But yes, that is it. Completely accurate is that people.
But you have millions of followers on, for example, Instagram, and I see on your Instagram account you post your comics, right? But those are not like for a creator who has millions and millions of followers on Instagram. There's this, not you, I'm just saying there's lots of people that have millions of followers on a social platform and the algorithm can change or you can't monetize it or you're creating art for the customer being the person on Instagram getting ads that are not yours. Yeah. Like my wife's on Instagram looking at someone else's ads. There's the money exchange. The content creator just provided the like nice background imaging to the Dove ad.
Oh yeah, and that's something that I like silently kind of fume about sometimes is that I am on almost every single site I'm on, I post for free and I make no money off of it because I personally don't put ads on my site because I don't like it. But I know, my content is making money for these larger sites and platforms. And, it's funny because like YouTubers make a lot of money because not all of them, but it's sort of built into their system that they get the shared ad revenue, and that is not the case. I always say like if I was a YouTuber and I had the same views that I get on Instagram and Facebook and could sort of bring it over, then I wouldn't have to publish books. And I love publishing books, so I would always still do that. But it's sort of like this new era, and it's kind of the Wild West because especially comic creators and like artists are trying to figure out how to monetize online, and most of them I think do freelance work and sell prints. But if these systems were a little more creator friendly, like how many people could really make a living just off of that, I think it would you'd see a huge shift. If
you're listening right now and you have any say in the matter, working for one of these giant tech conglomerates, please pay creators. I mean, Seth Godin always says most artists have an awareness problem, so it's not a big issue, right? Because the issue is not enough people have heard of your stuff. But when you're like you, with millions of followers across every platform, you're making this beautiful art. That seems a bit fishy. That the Dove ad, I'm nothing wrong with Dove soap. They did not pay me to say that because no one pays for ads on this show either. But like part of that should go to you because you're making 2.5 million people read your comics every day. Like, so that is so, there's an undercurrent of impropriety there that feels off. Yeah, for sure. It definitely gets a big eye roll from me. yeah, but more than an eye roll, we're starting the conversation. So that is fantastic. I'm looking at the 3 books in front of me, the 4, I guess, including the 2 and the last one. And could not be a more diverse collection, which I'm so happy about. Can we just take this conversation a little further into the kind of closing series of questions as we kind of think about wrapping up? And I know we might go off topic, and that's totally fine. Sarah, you're a book lover. There's lots of cartoons about books in your books. How do you organize your books? I love this question. I'm sure everyone gives you different answers, but I'm one of those people that like my dream place and dream apartment is one that is like
flanked and decorated by books. So I just moved and we're just like in a temporary apartment, but I definitely have this like dream image of just shelves like filled with books covering the walls. And I love homes that have shelves actually built into the wall. So it's like literally becomes part of the home. And it's also kind of like a pride thing. Like I love the idea that you can fill it up and you can fill it up over time. And then you can kind of like look back and you can sort of just like grab them off the shelf if you need. So right now, how I try to do it in my like kind of shabby apartment is I just have a bunch of shelves put up. And I just try to have like my favorites close to me. Like in my older apartment, I had a shelf sort of above my bed and I had my like all-time favorites, you know, sort of like over my head as I slept.
So it's not like it's organized by title or it's organized by author, it's organized by color. It's like my favorites close to me.
Yeah. And
it's so simple, but so beautiful.
Yeah. There's no order whatsoever.
What are some of the ones that you sleep near?
Okay. So I think in my old place, I had Play It As It Lays is one of my favorite.
I don't know. What's it called?
Play It As It Lays. And I think I really love books by women that are about like mental instability. And I think that's like a theme I sort of write about. Like, you know, like there's sort of like the classics. There's Girl Interrupted and Bell Jar. Like that theme is really important to me. And Play It As It Lays. It has this like beautiful metaphor of snakes and the way that you can have two species of snake and they look the same, but one has poison glands in its head. And so it's sort of this like metaphor. She sort of questions, you know, like why is this character like this and one is not? And I just thought it was this like, there's a lot of other themes in the book besides mental illness, but I just thought that was like a stunning visual metaphor that I always think about. And so that was there. I sort of maybe going on that theme, I really like the stories from like the 60s. So this is a recent one, but Emma Cline's The Girls. Like I just thought that was like a really fun book.
Yeah.
What else was up there? A lot of my favorite comics as well. I had the classics, like I had Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side. And Liz, I don't know if her last name is pronounced Climo or Climo. She's a cartoonist I really like, and that was up there.
I unfortunately cannot clarify for you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Liz. Yeah, that's just to name a few.
I just love the proximity. I just love the like proximity to sleeping me as a great kind of book organization technique. And you're right. You know, we've recorded a number of these chapters. Every single person's is completely different. Yeah, like literally no two people are the same. I'm in the Dewey Decimal System, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which it really scratches a deep-seated organizational itch inside me. So like I'll look in the front of the book, find the Dewey Decimal Code.
Wow.
If it's there. If not, I have 2 apps on my phone specifically to look up. And one app, I can show you my phone right now. Let's check out this app. This app is called, for those listening who want this app, it's called Decimator. Okay. And then like I get to look, I'm clicking into it. Now it's like I press 5. 50X is science. Okay. 51X is math. 513 is arithmetic. 513.5 is numeration systems. So like if I buy a book and it's 513.5, I slide it in between. Wow. And sure enough, it goes on my, I can zoom back out here. You can see it goes between like algebra and topology. And that's in math, but which is between, of course, science and astronomy. So I probably have hardly any books in this topic, maybe 1 or 2, but it's cool. It's so cool. Like I did this and then I was like, oh, this is so weird. I have only 3 books in the entire religion, like religion's the whole 200s. And I had like 3 books there total. And I was like, oh man, like I've really got to brush up on my religious knowledge. But then science was like the next branch, like in the 500s. And I had 2 books there. So I was like, oh man, I got nothing in religion or science. I'm just totally ignorant of everything. And then something like arts and recreation, which of course includes my favorite 741.59 comic books, has tons. All my graphic novels, all the cartoon books, all that stuff. And so I use Decimator, this app. And then the other app I use is called Library Tools Mobile to help me look up numbers of books that don't have a number in it. Sorry to go on a rant about my own thing.
No. I mean, that's so fascinating because that is so like purely organizational. But I wonder what the visual result is, because I think some people even organize their books just by color and size.
Totally.
So yours are really like, they look like they're all over the place, I bet, because there's no like correlation in the covers. But it's organized like down to the decimal.
Yeah, totally. And there's new decimals coming out, if you can believe it. Like sometimes they get hit a decimal that doesn't even in the categorization. Seth Godin organizes his books by height. Like from shortest to tallest. And as he says, you always know where to put it.
Yeah, it works. Yeah,
And color is
very
so
simple.
Color is so popular. Carrie Cullen I took a picture with her after we did our episode in her home in Washington D.C. and we posed in front of her like blue bookshelf.
Wow.
Yeah, which is like,
I love that.
Yeah, totally. Side note, I once went to a Chapters bookstore in Scarborough, Ontario, and they had a category called books with blue covers in the bookstore.
I love that.
They can print their own label, and it's like, I was like, what? How? And she's like, well, people come in here all the time. Like, what's the book with a blue cover? And so they put the 10 most popular books with blue covers on that table, and then they point them at the table. And sure enough, everyone's like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
There's The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. Or there's like Chris Hatfield's new book or whatever. And it's like, sure enough. Okay. We could go on about book organization for a while. What's your favorite bookstore, living or dead, and why?
I love that it says living or dead. Okay, so you probably get this answer a lot, but for me, it's the Strand bookstore in New York. And I have a personal connection to it because it was my first book debut I did there.
Oh, your first bookstore event.
Yeah.
You in front of a live audience.
Yeah, I remember how nervous I was, and I've gotten a lot better at public speaking since then. I mean, I thought I was going to pass out.
Yeah, but they started you in the Strand.
Yeah.
Like they should have started you in like kind of like some public library in the middle of nowhere to get your chops kind of going.
Yeah, I have no idea how I managed to pull that one off. But yeah, so I mean, and it's also a stunning bookstore, and it's right by Union Square. It's just an amazing
What's the tagline?
place.
18 miles of books?
Oh, I actually don't know.
I think it's something like, I think I've seen that on like the little bag. I don't know if that's still the case.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah.
For any Brits or Canadians listening, that's like 24 kilometers of books or so.
I can't do math, so I'm just going to assume you're correct. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a lot of people's favorites, but for good reason. It's an amazing place.
And I love the personal collection because you'll never forget that. Like that is your first ever bookstore event forever. Sarah, do you have a white whale book or a book that you've been wanting to read the longest but never have? Sorry if we're tapping into some of your book guilt or shame here, but do you have a book that you've been like on your bedside table forever? And by the way, if you don't worry, because like Judy Blume just told me that she's never read any Jane Austen books.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can say anything.
Yeah. Well, I actually have one, and it's just because thematically it seems like something I'd be really into, but it's kind of long, and so I'm just like, it's like pure laziness. But it seems amazing. It's The House of the Spirits.
Oh, I don't know it. The House of the Spirits. Do you know the author or no?
I think her first name is Isabella.
Isabella? Okay, we'll link to it, so it's fine.
Yeah, we'll find
The House of the Spirits. And why do you want to read it?
Because I think, so to my knowledge, it's sort of like a family story, and there's like multiple characters over time. Like I really like My Brilliant Friend. I like stories that have like their whole world, and yeah, it just seems like something I'd be into. I think it's supposed to be like a little spooky, which is also something I'm into. Like I like a little bit of like a darker edge. I've been meaning to read it for like 3 years now, and I always pick up a nonfiction book and just like go through it because that's the easiest thing to me. Like I said, I'm an information processor, and I read nonfiction books all the time and in like 2 days, and that's like what's easy for me. But to sit down with like a book with characters and like metaphor, and especially one that's like a family story, I know is like a challenge for me, but I know I'm going to like it. So it's something I'm going to get to. Beautiful.
Thank you for sharing that. And we asked that question partly so it alleviates all of our listeners from the book guilt and book shame they feel about their own white whale book. We all have them. Now, 2 more questions and we're done. If you could delete it from your brain, what book would you most want to read again as if it was your first time?
This was the question I was really struggling with. And I was thinking a lot about Wild Magic because more so than reading a book again, I would really love to recapture that just like amazing, just like being totally into a world and like really believing it. And I think a lot of people have that like with Harry Potter. And like if I could just recapture that, that would be really special. So like I know it was already on the list, but I think maybe it would be to like bring myself back to something like Wild Magic.
And also just you mentioned earlier about like just being this shameless, nerd. Not caring what people thought about what you're reading. Now, look, we have talked so much about your most formative books. We have not talked a tremendous amount about you. As I mentioned, your success is really quite staggering. And for a lot of people, it may appear overnight. Of course, it's not the case. You've been drawing cartoons since you were a kid. You went to art school. You've been studying. You worked a long time before Sarah Scribbles took off. So could you look back and leave us with a final piece or two of advice for aspiring cartoonists or people that want to do what you do?
Okay, so a lot of artists or writers think they need to create a work or get to a point that they think is good enough, and then they can start posting it and sending it out. And that, let me tell you something, you will never get there, because I think if you're creative by nature, you're a little bit self-critical. And you have to make bad work, and people have to see it, and you need to grow and progress. So if you are creative, just start posting now. I know you think it's not good. I know you're scared. Just do it right now.
Ah, beautiful. Close. I love the fat Garfield metaphor. Just post. Thank you, Sarah Andersen, so much for your time, for sitting with me above like the highest point we could possibly be in all of North and South America right now to do this episode, this chapter of 3 books. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Just post. Just post. You have to start making bad work. Some of Sarah's final words of wisdom. Maybe that's the way through it all. Maybe that's the way we get back to what we were talking about at the beginning, navigating the complexities, the stresses, the anxieties of childhood and of growing up these days. Maybe it's to just post, to just go through it all. We opened into this incredible conversation around shame and online shaming, and you could hear Sarah's passion and the fire inside her that she feels because she's been a target of some online shaming campaigns. And a lot of us who are out there publicly these days, I think a lot of people that are just even publicly on Instagram with 14 followers showing pictures of their cat when they're home alone on a Saturday night, you feel shame too if everybody else is out, right? There's a lot of that happening right now, and I found Sarah's conversation and insights remarkable about tapping deeper, finding that version of yourself that you like the most, that you feel most comfortable with, and who is unabashedly themselves. And now, if you've made it to the end of the podcast, I'd like to welcome you back into the end of the podcast club. This is the club where I talk directly to you, you talk directly to me, and we have a little suffix, a little closing conversation about what we've just talked about, but also we interact one-on-one about the show and about how it's going. So first off, let's go to the phones.
Hi, Neil. My name's Heather Hansen. I'm from New York City, and I'm writing a book, and my first book, and found your podcast sort of by happenstance. And I can't thank you enough. I am enjoying this podcast more than any I've ever listened to, and they are multiple. I love the fact that you're willing to say, I don't know what that word means, which so many people are not willing to say, and how else can we learn? Most of the things you don't know what they mean, neither do I. So that's a huge help. And I also love that every podcast leaves me with questions and things to think about and things to talk about, which I super enjoy, and leaves me with a list of books to read. I also highly, highly, highly recommend it to anyone who will listen, and look forward to the podcast with your Uber driver. I do hope that you're going to do that, as you discussed with Seth, and I think his book title is fabulous. I would buy that book in a second. Keep them coming. I'm hoping to be your 223rd episode and give you my 3 formative books once I've published mine. Thanks so much, Neil. Bye.
Well, thank you so much for your call, Heather from New York City. I really appreciate it. And it's funny what you say about ignorance, or asking dumb questions. You didn't quite say ignorance, but I that's how I heard it. And really, this is an inspiration for me, right? Because I was working as a middle manager inside Walmart Canada when we suddenly got a new CEO. And this guy's name was Dave Cheesewright. And he walked into the building, 1,200 people working there. And it was pretty obvious this guy was going to start asking dumb questions. Like many organizations, the company sort of developed a little bit of its own language. You had to know the department numbers. Department 3 was stationery. Department 5 was toys. Department 7 was electronics, or whatever it was. And you had to know the store numbers. And this is what I call TLAs, or three-letter acronyms. A lot of companies have this. A lot of schools have this. A lot of cultures have this. They have their own language. But Dave, even though he was CEO, would always be like, Department 3, what's that? They'd be like, Dave, that's stationery. That's the most profitable department in the whole store. And he didn't seem to care. And I realized over time that's like he was just confident enough to know that he didn't know. He was confident enough to know that he didn't know. And I loved that about him. And I went on later in life to work for him directly. And I hope actually to have Dave on this show. He ended up going up and up and up to the CEO of Walmart International, the world's largest organization. So I find him very inspiring in many different ways. But more importantly, it's like the confidence to know you don't know. And I'm not saying I'm there yet, but I appreciate you recognizing the fact that I'm going to keep asking them questions on behalf of all of us, because there's a lot we can learn, and the world is far too big. There is far too much stuff out there to ever believe that you can know everything. And that's another stress that we didn't even talk about in today's show that I think we should all relieve ourselves of. Relieve yourself of feeling obligated to know everything. Relieve yourself of feeling obligated to know everything. Doesn't it just feel so relaxing? You're just like, I'm not going to keep up with the news. I'm not going to know all the new music. I'm not going to know who's dating who in the celebrity world. I'm not going to understand like everything about science and math and English and know what cool books are just coming out. I'm not going to know it all. I'm not going to figure it out, and that's okay. So thank you, Heather, for prompting this chapter's rant. And now it's time for the review of the chapter. As you know, what we do every single chapter of the show is we comb iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. We try to pick out a review that one of you has left us. And if we read your review on the air, then you are the winner of a free signed book. You just have to email us, get our contact off 3books.co, and tell us, hey, you just read my review, and we'll mail you a signed book. Okay. Usually we mail you one of my signed books, like the Book of Awesome or the Happiness Equation. But sometimes people say like, hey, you know what? You guys just talked about hyperbole and a half. I really want that. Can you send it to me? Sure. We don't really care. We'll send you whatever book you want. We're going to try to send you a book. We might not be able to get hyperbole and a half signed, but we owe you a book. Okay. If we read your review. Now, who do we owe a book to this week or this chapter? It is Sal Mazzarelli. His review, 5 stars on iTunes, says inspiring personal growth, development, and joy. Neil says this podcast is for book writers, makers, sellers, lovers, and librarians, but I think it's for so much more than that. It's for anyone who wants to have fun, feel inspired, grow, develop, learn, and have a little joy in their life. Thank you so much, Sal. You are the winner of this chapter's review of the chapter. And now it's time to talk about the word of the chapter. Did you notice earlier in the conversation, Sarah said this quote? She said this quote, I was so unabashedly enthusiastic about things, and I had no shame about being a nerd. I didn't have any of those self-conscious fears yet. I was so unabashedly enthusiastic, unabashedly. I was like, that's a really powerful word. It's a punchy word. I look it up, unabashedly. And according to Merriam-Webster, I'm just going to read you the definition right now. When you are unabashed, you make no apologies for your behavior. But when you are abashed, your confidence has been shaken and you may feel rather inferior or ashamed of yourself. The interesting thing about the word origin here is that English speakers have been using abashed to describe feelings of embarrassment since the 14th century. But they've only used unabashed since the late 1500s. Both words can be traced back to the Anglo-French word aber, A-B-A-I-R, which means to astonish. But isn't that interesting that we knew how to use the word abashed? Confidence is shaken, you feel inferior, 100 years before we knew how to use the word unabashed. Like that you make no apologies for your behavior. You're just like strongly the way you are. It took us 100 years to figure out how to develop the opposite word, unabashedly. And I loved how she said it. I'm going to read her quote one more time. I was so unabashedly enthusiastic about things, and I had no shame about being a nerd. I didn't have any of those self-conscious fears yet. So my challenge with this word of the chapter is, how can you feel unabashed more? How can you feel unabashedly yourself more? How can you get rid of the self-conscious fears, the self-conscious shame, the self-conscious stresses and anxieties that we all have on top of all of our heads? Unabashedly. My challenge is try to use that word one time until the next new moon or full moon, people. Unabashedly. What can you be more unabashed about? And now it's me signing off at the end of this fantastic chapter, fantastic conversation with Sarah Andersen of Sarah's Scribbles, by saying thank you so much, as always, for listening to 3 Books. Give me a call anytime at 1-833-READ-A-LOT. And remember, until next time, you are what you eat and you are what you read. Thanks so much for listening, and talk to you soon.